Thanks, Corey, and thanks to our media partners for joining us this morning. And I want to also thank both Dr. Lindquist and Michelle Roberts for being available on this media opportunity. So I want to start with sharing the news that you all saw that we had put a statement out shortly ago, and certainly in follow-up to the guidance from both on the federal level from the FDA and the CDC, that Washington State Department of Health is pausing the use of Johnson & Johnson, J&J vaccine statewide starting immediately. And as you know, we are doing a lot of things behind the scenes, as you can imagine. One, communicating and talking through with our federal partners to recognize and understand what they are seeing and what their concerns are, and then certainly communicating with our local partners as well as those who have received a Johnson & Johnson vaccine in the state of Washington. And then certainly we want to make sure to communicate information to our community members, especially individuals who may have received the Johnson & Johnson vaccine recently. As you know, the FDA and the CDC have asked for the vaccine to be put on hold until we have additional information and guidance coming from our federal partners on how best to move forward. And what I wanted to emphasize are a few things. First of all, that this action is being taken out of extreme caution and based on the appearance of a rare, very rare, and we will talk about that in terms of how rare of a side effect, but a serious side effect, which includes blood clots, which can be in different parts of the body, including the brain. It can be in the abdomen or the belly. It can be in extremities, etc. But that is a very rare occurrence and happening in individuals. And thus far, it's been six individuals from overall 6.8 million doses that have been administered across the nation. So it is a less than 1 in a million chance of this side effect based on the information we have. It's blood clots combined with low platelet counts in these 6 patients, and all were women under the age of 50. They were between the ages of actually 18 and 48. And these were individuals who developed these blood clots. And again, they were associated with what we medically, Dr. Lindquist and I speak with our medical providers on. It's a condition called thrombocytopenia, which means low platelet counts. So individuals with low platelet counts who developed a rare side effect of blood clots, and these were all women between the ages of 18 and 48, all were under the age of 50. So 1 in a million occurrence means that this is very rare. Now, we do want to recognize that the federal government, our partners at CDC and FDA, jumped on this very quickly. And they did this because they wanted to make sure that they were getting information out to the community and the public. But I also want to recognize another very important reason that our federal partners went forward with this was that they wanted to give medical doctors and clinicians and healthcare providers enough information on how to treat an individual who might come to them with post-vaccine, with symptoms that would make them concerned to seek care and then determined to have a blood clot. And that's where they were wanting to make sure that the doctors and the healthcare providers had enough information so they knew how to treat those conditions. And the reason that I say that, and Dr. Lindquist will go into more detail, but when you have thrombocytopenia, low platelet counts, and blood clots, if you treat with a medicine called heparin, it actually can be potentially more dangerous in that kind of a circumstance. And so you have to move forward with different kinds of therapeutics. And so this pause allows the CDC and our federal partners to get information out to medical doctors and healthcare providers on how best to treat individuals who may come forth and say that I'm having symptoms and are determined to have a blood clot. These obviously are adverse events that are very rare. They're unfortunate, but it should not take away from the fact that these 3 vaccines that we have are safe and effective. And this rarity of this side effect, again, 1 in a million, while serious, it has to be reminded to everybody that this is rare in and of itself. And the reason that I am saying that multiple times is that we want to make sure that people continue to have confidence in vaccines and they recognize the importance of those vaccines. To our partners on the ground, we already had a conversation earlier today with our local health jurisdictions, and we discussed this very issue. And we told them we were getting more information from our federal partners, and we reminded them the importance of if they have Johnson & Johnson vaccine that they've received or in their communities, that we do not want that vaccine to be administered at this time until the pause is lifted. We're also being told by our federal partners that that should be a matter of days, maybe a week or a bit longer, but it should not be longer than that. Again, one of the big reasons that they wanted to put the pause in place was so they could have a discussion with healthcare providers so they knew how to treat this potential complication. The other thing that we told and talked to our public health partners on is the importance that if somebody in their community has received the vaccine, what we would like for them to do. For those who have received the vaccine more than several weeks ago or a month ago, the risk of the complication that we're discussing here, the blood clots, is very low. But people who have received the Johnson & Johnson vaccine over the last 2 to 3 weeks and who develop severe headache or abdominal pain, leg pain, or shortness of breath within those 3 weeks after vaccination should absolutely contact their healthcare provider. So it is really important that as we talk to our community members, that we make sure our community members know that the vast majority of people that have received Johnson & Johnson vaccine will not have any side effect. But there are cases in a very rare instance where they may, and we want to do everything we can to connect them with their healthcare provider. The final thing that I would just want to make sure that we recognize is that we're now at the Department of Health going back and looking at where J&J vaccine was shipped and delivered, where it may have been administered, so we can make contact with those providers directly. We're going to ask those providers to also connect with the individuals that they may have administered a vaccine, if necessary, to get information out to them so that they can have good information, clear guidance on what they should be on the lookout for. We're obviously going to have more information on our Department of Health website, and we're also going to be putting information on social media. And so we would just ask for you to amplify that message into the community. The main message is that we are now on pause with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, pending getting more information from both our federal partners as well as on the vaccine itself. Also, we recognize that this is a very rare side effect, 1 in a million, and it is absolutely critical that we emphasize that one of the reasons that the federal government and our federal partners went forth with putting this pause in place is they wanted doctors and healthcare providers to have enough time to understand how better and best to treat if somebody comes in with these symptoms. We're working with our partners so that we can identify where the vaccine has gone and also work behind the scenes so that they are not delivering or administering any more of that vaccine until the pause is lifted. And finally, to our community members, if you have received the Johnson & Johnson vaccine over a month ago or over 3 weeks ago, you should not be of concern. It's those individuals who may have received the vaccine under the 3 weeks. We want to make sure that you're monitoring your symptoms for severe headache or leg pain, abdominal pain, etc. And we want to make sure that if you develop any of those symptoms that you make contact with your healthcare provider immediately. So let me stop there and turn it over to Dr. Lindquist. And if Michelle has any additional comments that she wants to make, but we'll turn it over and then we'll go into the media scrum.
Yeah, I had a list of things I want to make sure we covered, and Dr. Shah covered all of them, but there are two small points I want to point out to everyone. And that is, this means that our serious adverse event reporting system works, that we have this thing called the VAERS, or Vaccine Associate Reporting System. And there's a lot of questions about, is this cause and effect? And I want to caution us not to say that this is caused by the vaccine. It's associated with the vaccine. And even though there was studies done for EUA approval, there weren't enough cases to be detected with a small amount. So now that we've given 6.8 million doses, we can start to see things like this emerge, associations with these clots. Again, only 6 out of 6.8 million doses is pretty rare, and the VAERS system is working. So that means we pause on this. That means we look, is it cause and effect? Is there truly a larger association? And that is reviewed by the ACIP committee on Wednesday, which is tomorrow. They will give us more science on this. So I really caution us not to just jump to conclusions that it is truly from the vaccine. It is us pausing to look at this more carefully. Again, if you are a provider that is seeing someone that has any of these concerns that Dr. Shah outlined, headache, chest pain, shortness of breath, abdominal pain, or leg pain, we want those reported in the VAERS system. So as providers see these cases, we really want them to report them to VAERS. And again, putting this in perspective, 1 in a million versus some other medications that we know of have much, much higher side effects. So very common antibiotics like ciprofloxacin, 1 per every 10,000 prescriptions written, people can have tendon rupture. So it really puts us in perspective, 1 in a million versus 1 in 10,000 prescriptions written for common antibiotics we know with serious side effects. And puts it in our day-to-day perspective of what is our risk of a motor vehicle accident. So if you look at insurance companies know these numbers pretty well, but if you look at a 1,000-mile trip, 1 out of 366 people are going to have a car accident during that 1,000-mile trip. So again, this association is much, much weaker than any of those risks that we just outlined, like a car accident or severe side effects from common antibiotics. And with that, I'll turn it over to Michelle. Anything that you'd like to add?
Just a couple things I want to add, just to make sure people know we're talking about the J&J vaccine. This is not a side effect, a potential side effect that has been identified with the Moderna or the Pfizer vaccine, and there is no pause. So we continue to encourage vaccination as soon as you are available and eligible to get a dose. And we are not pausing J&J or Pfizer or Moderna vaccine. So vaccination is continuing right now in our state with those other 2 vaccines. I also want to, we will be kind of the next piece where we'll have more information about next. What's coming next will be after the federal CDC Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, or ACIP. They are meeting tomorrow, late morning our time. That will help more about what's next and what is these more details about these rare events, and having some independent experts continue to discuss what's being seen and what should be next. Our Western State Scientific Advisory Work Group that we are in with California, Nevada, and Oregon is also going to meet tomorrow evening to talk about what we know, and they'll make recommendations as well as on what is next. So there was a lot of independent analysis looking at this safety data and helping us determine what is the next right step after this pause, which is out of an abundance of caution.
Corey, one quick thing before we jump to the questions. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of themes that both Scott and Michelle brought up. One is that when it comes to birth control pills, oral contraceptive pills, the risk of blood clots is somewhere in the range of 500 to 1,000 women out of 1 million women who are taking those medications. So again, it's a reminder that when we're talking about 1 in 1 million versus oral contraceptives, 500 to 1,000, that puts a scope and scale in the midst of this. The other thing is, as was in our media statement, we want to make clear that we have received Johnson & Johnson vaccine in the state of Washington. And certainly we're doing everything we can to identify where the vaccine has been delivered, but also where it's been administered. And then again, just a reminder that this is such a small proportion of the vaccines that have come into the state of Washington. Again, we continue with Moderna and Pfizer for now. We're confident that this vaccine pause for Johnson & Johnson will be lifted in a matter of time. And once that's lifted, the appropriate discussions can be had with clinicians that we do believe that this vaccine is going to be back in the mix to be a third vaccine that can be delivered both safely and effectively to our community members. So again, the message to our community is we're doing everything we can behind the scenes. We want to make sure that the right information, the credible information is out there, and we want to make sure we stay cautious as we move forward during this pause, but we are also confident that this pause will be temporary and that we will be able to move forward with the administration of all 3 of these vaccines in the future. And with that, Corey, we'll turn it back to you.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Again, thank you for joining today's media availability. We will be prioritizing reporters who have entered the queue by email, and then, of course, encourage reporters to update their questions in the chat. Our schedule has us ending at 10:30 a.m., but we will do our best to accommodate as many reporter questions as possible. To begin, and first on my list, Steve McCarron with Como asks in the chat, have there been any discussions about delaying the expanded vaccine eligibility later this week because of the new developments with the J&J vaccine? What will the impact of the J&J vaccine developments be on the state's vaccine supply?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And there has not been discussion about that because we continue to have 2 vaccines, Moderna and Pfizer, that are available. And fortunately, in this case, they're the vast majority of the vaccines that have come into the state of Washington. And so we can comfortably continue with the plan on Vax Day, which affectionately we call 2 days from now, where all Washingtonians who are 16 and older are able to receive or are eligible to receive vaccines. We still have those 2 vaccines available. And again, if this were a situation where Johnson & Johnson was an extremely more quantity proportion, if you will, of our vaccine supply, then that would be a different issue, but that's not the case here.
Our next question comes from Nick Popham. I was wondering if we're now seeing these clots, how J&J was able to get EUA approval. Shouldn't this have been caught during the trial process?
Yeah, thanks for that. And we're actually getting more information as well from, I think Michelle reminded us a bit earlier that we still haven't gotten all the information. That's why the pause is good, because it gives us a time to actually get additional information on both the science and the evidence, and even some of the time frame pieces. And then, as was mentioned by both Scott and Michelle, we've got ACIP that's coming together that's also going to be reviewing that information, and we'll be able to get some additional timeline as well as what the numbers are. But Scott made a really good point, which was, it's when you have more vaccine experience, right? So we have 6.8 million doses now that have been delivered. That's when, in the case of J&J, you're able to actually determine what additional side effects there may be. Michelle, do you want to add to that?
I just want to add about the power and robustness of the vaccine safety monitoring systems in the US and why it's so important that those are done at the federal level to have the power in numbers to pick up a rare side effect. So often these will take millions of doses of vaccine to be given, which is more than is in the clinical trials. And so that's why this is a sign that the system is working. The pause allows us to experts to do further investigation of the data, really look in about these cases, what happened, to really try to understand, are they associated with the vaccine or potentially caused by the vaccine? And then what does that mean for how we may use the vaccine in the future? So it's a sign of the robustness of our system, the fact that millions more doses have been given. This is still right now, 6 cases out of over almost 7 million doses of vaccine, of J&J vaccine being given in the nation. So a lot more to come, but the pause is really about an investigation and giving a chance for experts to really dig into and further understand what's going on.
Our next question comes from Joseph Thompson with the Everett Herald.
Hi, thanks for taking the question. But if the effect is so rare and evaluation could only take a matter of days, why halt the massive effort to use J&J as opposed to continuing the use, seeing what ACIP says before pausing and giving people maybe the false impression it's a bigger deal than it might be? And how seriously did the state consider going against the federal recommendation? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Joseph. I think this has been some of our discussion behind the scenes. We've been, obviously talking to the governor, his team, and we've been huddling internally within DOH as well. We also thought it was best at this point to continue with the pause and adhere to it because we didn't have enough information. And as we get that information, then we can certainly continue on. But as you said, it's so rare that it's very possible that this is going to be a situation that is going to evolve very quickly. The other thing that I would say very clearly is, again, the reemphasis that and we respect this, that the federal government wanted to make sure there was enough time to have those discussions with healthcare providers, specifically on therapeutics. If somebody came in with this kind of symptomatology and diagnosed with a clot, they wanted to make sure that there was enough information that was going there. And I'll be honest, and Scott can speak about this as well from a clinician standpoint, from a physician standpoint. I can't fault anybody for being cautious when it comes to wanting to have those discussions with providers from a therapy standpoint. Scott, you want to add to that one?
Yeah, the quick answer, it's all about the patients, right? We don't want, when there's a question about a serious event, and we haven't used this word here, but I'm going to use it. It's cerebral venous sinus thrombosis, which means a clot in the brain. And we don't want to minimize that because the common treatment for clots, if we use it, heparin, can actually be devastating in these patients. So it's all about the patients. We want to slow down. We want to pause. Yes, we did, as Dr. Shaw pointed out, have this consideration, but at the end of the day, this is such a serious side effect. May not be cause and effect, may be a rare association, but because the common treatment can be so devastating, until we have a better idea of this, we want to protect all patients in the state.
Our next question comes from Megan Campbell with the Puget Sound Business Journal. Megan, go ahead.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Awesome. I was just wondering if this impacts the economic outlook at all for Washington State's recovery.
I'm not sure, Megan, thanks for the question. I'm not sure I understand the connection with respect to the J&J vaccine. You mean in terms of supply? I'm not sure I'm getting the connection.
Right. Yeah, I just thought that the moving forward in vaccination phases, which is still the plan, was largely dependent on supply increasing, and a lot of businesses are sort of relying on that hope for reopening. And I just was wondering if you had any thoughts on what that would mean for the future of, like spring and summer economic recovery and reopening. It may be a better question for the governor's office, but I thought I'd pose it here.
Sure, and maybe a great question for the governor and his press briefing. But I would say this, that we absolutely know that vaccines are our path to the future in order for being able to get out of this pandemic. And that's what all of us are wanting. And that's what all of us are looking forward to. So any time that you have a supply disruption or a change in vaccines, what you thought you were getting or for whatever reason you can't utilize, in this case, is our work today with J&J vaccine. If you can't utilize the vaccine, then that certainly disrupts things. Now, the good news is that for J&J, it was such a small proportion of the vaccines overall that we were already had gotten into the state and also getting into the state over the next few weeks, that it should have minimal disruption from that standpoint. But again, down the road, if for whatever reason you have supply chain constraints that make it hard for you to continue to vaccinate, you don't have enough vaccines coming in, and it's not just a short-term, but a long-term issue, then that can impact all of us and all the work that we're doing. So I think you're making a good point, which is it is all connected, but ultimately, in the case of J&J, the vaccine is such a small proportion of our supply that we don't think that this is going to have as much of an impact. Now, if the pause were to continue for an extended period of time, then we would have to relook at things.
Yeah, and I'll just follow up with a couple hard numbers to add to Dr. Shaw. J&J is only about 6% of the total vaccine we've gotten in our state. We've gotten around 5 million doses of COVID-19 vaccine to the state total. The vast majority has been Pfizer and Moderna vaccine, about 320,000 total doses of Johnson & Johnson vaccine have either come through our state allocation or through the federal allocations to pharmacies and community health centers in our state. So that's about 6% of the vaccine. So it is a very small portion right now.
Our next question comes from Will Stone with NPR.
Hey there, can you just clarify which kinds of clinics are impacted by this, if any? Or are there specific regions that are having to, rearrange their plans because of the pause?
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. Oh, so I was going to thanks for that question. We are actually behind the scenes doing that exact work, which is to not just identify in general in the counties where the J&J vaccine has gone, but the specific providers. And we have asked, obviously, our local health jurisdictions and those providers to not administer further J&J vaccine until this pause is lifted. Michelle, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I can just share a little bit more about the high level of numbers. Like, again, I said 320,000 doses of Johnson & Johnson vaccine have been delivered to the state in our in-state and federal allocation. 160,000 of those have been administered and reported to the IIS as of 4/11. Both of those numbers we'll expect to change some over the next couple of days as doses administered in the last week continue to get reported to the state. And there is some Johnson & Johnson vaccine that was ordered late last week that will be coming into the state still. And that vaccine for what has the 320,000 doses that have been delivered so far to Washington have been delivered to around 650 facilities across the state. So it is in all communities across the state. Obviously, a greater proportion of it would be in the Puget Sound region, just where the greater proportion of our vaccine is delivered regularly just because of the population size. But it is in communities across the state, 650 total facilities.
Our next question comes from Robbie Whelan with Wall Street Journal.
Hi, I'm sorry. I just wanted to ask if there's sort of similar to the previous question. I'm curious if the plans have changed at any of Washington's large vaccine sites that are coming up in the next few weeks. How many, for example, vaccine sites that were planned to use Johnson & Johnson doses have been either canceled or altered in what kind of shots they're going to provide, and where are those events and that were altered?
Yeah, Michelle, let me just make a quick comment, then I'll turn it to you. One is that to date, we had not been using J&J vaccine at any of the state-supported mass vaccination sites. We were planning on starting with J&J at one of the sites, and Michelle can give details about that. And obviously, we've pulled back because we're not going to administer J&J until the pause is lifted. The other thing is that we also have connected with the FEMA site in Yakima, and they also were not administering J&J vaccine. So I think your question is an appropriate one, that there were plans in place to use the vaccine. So the second part of our discussion with providers is where we can, and obviously we still are in a vaccine limited supply phase, that where we can turn around and not just have them hold the J&J vaccine, but where we can, again, with supply constraints in mind, where we can also provide additional Pfizer or Moderna vaccine to them. Michelle?
Yeah, our job really is to get vaccine ordered and out to the providers, and we don't necessarily know all the specifics of their plans each week. Like Dr. Shaw said, we do know about the 4 state mass vac sites. One of them, the Benton Franklin site, was going to start J&J vaccine today. We have paused that, just like we're asking all providers to pause on J&J vaccine. And for any clinics they were planning on this week, starting today, using J&J vaccine. So those people who potentially had appointments at clinics from J&J vaccine will hear from the providers. We are working with providers. Some of those same providers already had Moderna or Pfizer vaccine, so it may be pretty seamless behind the scenes, or in other people who are planning to get vaccinated, we'll hear from their provider if they need to reschedule their appointment. Once again, we don't know how long this is going to last at this point. It really is too early to predict that or predict what the long-term implications are. So we'll be waiting for more guidance from the federal government later this week.
Our next question comes from Evan Bush with the Seattle Times.
Hi, thanks so much. I'm wondering if this pause will require some reshuffling of vaccine allocation for equity or geographic pro rata concerns. And then a second question, thromboembolic events were identified in the EUA as adverse events to watch. Is that the same concern, and is this something the state has paid particular attention to since the J&J approval?
Yeah, so a couple of things. Thanks, Evan. First, one of the strategies that we were planning on using with J&J vaccine was where you were in a situation where you couldn't, or it was hard to go back for the second dose. And so, that obviously, again, I want to reemphasize, this is what we're considering likely a temporary pause. This is not a permanent, this is a temporary pause. And that is, something that would allow us, once we've gone past the period, would allow us to continue with the strategy moving forward. And why that's so important is that ultimately we do think that all three of these vaccines are safe and they are effective. And even with this very rare side effect of 1 in a million, it still just reminds us that no vaccine is 100% effective and no vaccine is 100% ultimately safe. You just like no medication is, just like as Dr. Lindquist said, there's so many other things that we entertain risk all the time. The reason that we are willing to continue with vaccines and vaccinations and therapeutics is because ultimately COVID-19 is not a mild disease. It is a severe disease that can cause in and of itself a number of complications, including concerns for ICU admission and deaths. So we just have to keep everything in perspective. Ultimately, look, as docs, we, Dr. Lindquist and I, when we treat patients and we talk to patients, we have to provide, additional information on what the side effect profiles are. And as you said, thromboembolic events are part of this vaccine, as well as the AstraZeneca vaccine. We do recognize that that's part of the profile, but again, it's very rare. And so, as Dr. Lindquist was describing, this is a particular kind of thrombotic event that we were in the health community concerned about. And so, yeah, I do think that there's a lot here that we need to unpack for community members. Ultimately, we do think that this is going to be released from a pause standpoint, and we're going to be able to continue to administer the vaccine. We do think that people should be mindful of the side effect. Obviously, we wouldn't be putting a pause in effect if there was no potential for a side effect, but they should also not be overly concerned. We do want our community members to absolutely, if you've received this vaccine the last 3 weeks, you monitor your symptoms. If you develop symptoms, like I said, severe headache, abdominal pain, leg pain, etc., we want you to seek care, or at least make contact with your healthcare provider as soon as possible, so that we can make sure that that's not an event that you're having. But again, it's a rare event, very rare, and we do think this pause is going to be lifted once we've had a chance to have conversations with our healthcare providers, so they know how to treat it if that rare event does occur.
All right, we're taking 2 more questions. Our next question comes from Emily Kopp with CQ Roll Call.
Thank you so much for calling on me. I hesitate to throw away a question, but I think all of my questions have been answered. Is there anything people didn't ask that you think is important to emphasize or reemphasize? What's the most important takeaway?
I think the most important takeaway is that our system is working, and that we have a vaccine system that's about getting as much vaccine out as quickly as possible to communities across this country and across our state. And we want to do so both quickly and equitably. At the same time, when we learn in the health community that something is going on, we want to take careful consideration of what that is. And when it requires us to have additional discussions with healthcare providers to make sure that they know what to do when faced with a clinical scenario of how to take care of an individual that comes in with symptoms that could be consistent with the clot, we want to make sure that's taken in consideration. But to the community members, we want to also say that these are safe vaccines and these are effective vaccines. And once this pause is lifted, once we've had a chance to have those conversations with our healthcare providers, and we've had CDC as well as FDA review the vaccine information, we're confident that this vaccine will also be back in the mix for use, because it is a safe and effective vaccine.
Our
Scott,
final
to add to that?
No, I think you covered it well.
Our final question for today's media availability comes from Essex Porter with Cairo. Essex, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. 2 questions related. There's not very much Johnson & Johnson in our system at the moment, but how much were we expecting as availability expanded? And for patients, what should they do now if their clinic has been canceled because of this?
Right. So I'm going to let Michelle answer the first question. I'll go with the second question. The first, there's one aspect of it is that if you've already received the Johnson & Johnson vaccine in the last 3 weeks, we want to make sure that you're monitoring symptoms. And so that's the first message. The second message is that if you've had a clinic that was scheduling Johnson & Johnson vaccine, again, there were not as many of those clinics across the state as the other Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, then those clinics will be putting information out on their own channels, whether it's media information, social media, their website, or making contact with the individual to give them the additional steps behind the scenes where we're able to provide, again, in a vaccine constrained environment, vaccines to those clinics for Moderna and Pfizer to get them through the pause period. We're going to do everything we can behind the scenes. So I hope that helps, Essex, from the messaging standpoint. Michelle, do you want to add sort of where we are, the look ahead for what J&J was looking like coming up in the next several weeks?
In the next several weeks, we were expecting very small amounts of J&J, and that's just happening across the country as some of the manufacturing problems they had already been experiencing, and as that manufacturing really ramps up in a bigger way. So this week, we were expecting around 370,000 doses of vaccine into the state. That's coming in this week. And only around 13,000 were going to be Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And then the next 2 weeks, our projected allocation of Johnson & Johnson was only around 4,000 doses each week. So it was a very, very small percentage of the vaccine the next few weeks. So it should have a minimal effect as far as, because it just wasn't going to be a vaccine that was going to be in large supply for maybe another month or more.
But we should say that we do know that if clinics had been planning on using J&J vaccine, for example, today or tomorrow or later this week, that there is some potential that there will be some cancellations or some reappointments that are going to be necessary, reschedules. So we know that this is going to be a disruption. Fortunately, because of the limited amount of vaccine that J&J represented for our state, it will not be an extreme disruption, but it will be an inconvenience to people. And it is unfortunate, right? When someone is looking forward to their vaccine appointment and they're scheduled today or tomorrow, and then that appointment is having to be rescheduled. So we know it's not going to be easy in communities, but it's the right thing to do until we get more information about this vaccine and the pause in and of itself, and then certainly making sure that it's communicated with our healthcare providers.
And with that, we'd like to conclude this media availability. I want to appreciate our panelists for being able to join on such short notice, and for all of you for making time to join. With that, an archive recording of this media availability will be available from TVW.
Hey, Corey, sorry, just to interrupt. Just a reminder that we're going to have our media, our weekly media tomorrow morning. So I just want to make sure that if we do learn any additional information between now and tomorrow, then we are planning on sharing that information at the media briefing tomorrow. So just wanted a reminder to our media partners.
Absolutely. We'll see you all there. If you have questions for tomorrow's media briefing, please email them in advance to doh-pio@doh.wa.gov. This concludes today's media availability. Thank you.